At my granddaughter's grand wedding, I discovered a harsh truth. I was not truly wanted there. They would learn a hard lesson for that oversight. The thought still stung like tiny pieces of glass in my heart. My own daughter. The one I raised didn't really want me at her child's most important day. My name is Beatrice. I'm 68 years old, and I always thought I understood what family meant. I believed that after a lifetime spent caring for my children and grandchildren, I would be welcomed warmly wherever they were. I have never been more wrong. It all began with the invitation to my only granddaughter Clara's wedding. The fancy envelope arrived 3 weeks after everyone else had received theirs. I brushed it off, thinking it was just a problem with the mail. The invitation itself looked quickly put together with no handwritten name, unlike the others I had seen posted by Clara's friends on social media. Still, I was so happy to be invited that I ignored these small warnings. Spent weeks getting ready. I bought a brand new dress, a soft lavender color that perfectly matched the wedding's theme. I even had a special pearl necklace made for Clara, using pearls that had belonged to my own mother. I had saved them for decades, waiting for just this moment. I also saved money for 6 months, even with my small teacher's pension, to give the happy couple a generous gift check. On the wedding day, I arrived early. The event hall was truly breathtaking, with white flowers hanging from the ceiling and sparkling lights that made everything feel like a fairy tale. Clara had always dreamed of a wedding like this, and my daughter Sarah certainly made sure every detail was perfect. Her husband, Paul, a very successful lawyer, spent a great deal of money. I looked for my name on the table where the seating cards were displayed, those little cards that tell each guest where to sit. I searched through the entire display, which was set up in alphabetical order: Harris, Green, Miller. Nothing with Everett, my last name. Confused, I asked one of the event staff. "Everett. Let me check," she said, looking at her list. Her face changed slightly, a small flicker of something I couldn't quite place. "Ah, here it is. You're at table 32. When I finally found table 32, my heart dropped. Was the table furthest from the main party hall, almost completely hidden behind a tall, fake column. It was so far from the stage that I could barely see Clara during the actual wedding ceremony. I looked at the names of the other people at my table. The family's old gardener, Sarah's hairdresser who had only worked for her a few times, Paul's father's driver. These were clearly not people who were part of the family's inner circle. They were guests invited out of duty, not true desire. "Grandma, you made it." Clara's voice was bright behind me. I turned to hug her. She looked so beautiful in her wedding gown. "Of course I came, my dear. I wouldn't have missed it for anything." Clara glanced at my assigned table, and I saw a flicker in her eyes. Embarrassment? Discomfort? She quickly looked away. "Is your seat okay?" Sarah organized the seating, and it's wonderful. I lied, forcing a smile. "Don't you worry about me." She seemed relieved by my answer and was quickly called away for more photos. "I have to go, Grandma. See you later." "All right, dear." The next few hours felt like a lesson in being invisible. No one came to speak with me, except for the other guests stuck at table 32. From where I sat, I could see Sarah moving gracefully among the more important guests, laughing loudly and posing for pictures. Paul followed her, looking proud in his expensive suit. It felt like watching a movie where I wasn't even an extra. During dinner, I needed to use the restroom. On my way back, I walked past a small office that was being used as a storage room for gifts and handbags. The door was slightly open, and I heard voices, Sarah and one of her friends. "I still can't believe you put her all the way back there," the friend said, her voice a little slurred from too much champagne. "What was I supposed to do?" Sarah retorted. "Put her at the main table so she could embarrass everyone with her old stories. You know how she is. Besides, Paul really wanted to impress his law firm partners, and honestly, she just doesn't fit the fancy look we've created. But she's your mother, Sarah. And I did invite her, didn't I? Believe me, it was a huge fight with Paul. He thought we could just not invite her. but I told him it would cause too much drama. Its way is better. She's technically here, but she won't get in the way. And for the photos, the photographer has strict instructions, only a few pictures with her. And none of them go into the main wedding album. The room began to spin around me. My own daughter was speaking about me as if I were a source of shame, a burden, an unwanted obligation. I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces as my legs wobbled under the shock of this discovery. I returned to table 32 on autopilot, my face a carefully blank mask to hide the storm brewing inside me. Sarah's words echoed in my ears, mixing with memories. The nights I stayed awake when she was sick. The years I worked 2 jobs to pay for her schooling. My endless support when she got pregnant with Clara while still in college. I finally understood with painful clarity that I had become one of the undesirables. I was the guest they had to put up with, not someone they wanted to celebrate. The weight of this realization was almost too much to bear. When dinner ended and the band began to play music, I stayed in my seat just watching. Sarah danced with Paul, then with his father. Clara spun in the arms of her new husband, radiant and truly happy. No one glanced my way. No one noticed when I picked up my handbag and stood up. I left the generous gift check I had prepared on the gift table. I placed the box with the pearl necklace beside it, a family treasure that now felt as out of place as I did. With one last look at the brightly lit hall where my family was celebrating without me, I quietly slipped out through a side door as I drove home. Alone in the dark, something inside me shifted. The tears that had welled up dried before they could even fall in their place. A cold, clear decision formed. I would never allow myself to be treated this way again. If they saw me as someone they could easily do without, then that is exactly what I would be absent. For years, I had put my family above everything else, giving up my own dreams, my time, my well-being. And this was my reward, being hidden behind a column, cut out of the official family memories, talked about as a problem. No, this would not stand. This humiliation would be the very last. When I got home that night, I did not cry as a heartbroken grandmother might be expected to do. Instead, I began to make plans. They wanted to remove me from the family story. I would rewrite the entire thing. That night, after the wedding, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat in my small living room, surrounded by old framed photographs that now seemed like reminders from a different world, one where my family actually cared about me. I picked up one picture, Sarah at her high school graduation. Her smile bright with future promises as I stood proudly beside her. I remembered the 3 different jobs I worked that year just to pay for her college application fees. My house was quiet, save for the steady ticking of the tall clock that had belonged to my late husband, Arthur. He had been gone for 15 years now, 15 years of facing life's challenges completely alone. Of being both a mother and a father to Sarah, of being the only grandparent Clara had ever known. Arthur passed away when Sarah was just 19. His heart simply stopped, without warning, one normal Tuesday morning. He collapsed at the breakfast table, his coffee still warm in his mug. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Like that. My partner of 23 years vanished from our lives. We had a modest amount of savings and a small life insurance payout. But it was not enough. Sarah was in her 2nd year at Greenfield College, an expensive private school she had wanted to attend since she was a little girl. Arthur and I had promised her we would make it happen no matter what. With him gone, that promise was now mine to keep alone. I sold our family car first, choosing to take buses and occasional rides from neighbors. Then I took on evening shifts at the local diner in addition to my daytime teaching job. On weekends, I typed up legal papers for a law firm downtown. Mind-numbingly boring work that I did until my fingers ached and my eyes burned. 3 jobs, very little sleep, and a constant ache in my chest that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. This became my new life. "Mom, you don't have to do this," Sarah had said during one of her visits home, finding me asleep at the kitchen table, buried under papers. "I can transfer to a state school. It's much cheaper." had insisted, "Your father wanted this for you. We planned for this. Nothing has changed." But everything had changed. I just didn't want her dreams to be another sad result of Arthur's death. I remembered the day Sarah met Paul during her last year at Greenfield. He came from a very wealthy family, old money, as they say. His father owned a well-known law firm. His mother was on the board of several important charities, and his childhood home even had its own name, Willow Creek Manor. He was handsome, ambitious, and completely charmed by my daughter. When Sarah brought him home to meet me, I saw her look at our simple three-bedroom house with new eyes. Eyes that had grown used to grand marble entryways and sparkling crystal chandeliers. I watched her nervously straighten the faded throw pillows and apologize for the creaky floor in the hallway. "Your home is charming, Mrs. Everett," Paul had said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he looked around our living room. "Sarah has told me so much about growing up here. I served them my best pot roast on the good china dishes I had saved for special events." Sarah barely touched her food. Later, I overheard her in the kitchen with Paul. "It's just for now," she had whispered. "Once I graduate, we won't have to come here often." The memory still stung fresh as I sat there alone after the wedding. I gently put down the graduation photo and picked up another, Clara as a newborn in my arms. Sarah had called me in tears from her apartment near campus during her final year. "Mom, I'm pregnant," she had sobbed. "Paul's parents will disown him if they find out. His father has his whole career planned, and it definitely doesn't include a baby. I don't know what to do." I drove to her that very night, 3 hours on dark roads with rain heavily hitting the windshield of the used car I had finally been able to buy. When I arrived, she collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with fear. "We'll work this out," I had promised, together. And we did. I took a break from teaching to help Sarah through her pregnancy. I was right there in the delivery room when Clara entered the world. Her tiny cries filling the space as Sarah squeezed my hand so hard I thought my fingers might break. Paul proposed 2 months later. It seemed more out of duty than love to me. His parents were furious at first, but they eventually accepted the situation, on the condition that Paul would still join his father's law firm as planned. "We'll need help with the baby," Sarah had told me one evening as she rocked Clara to sleep, "just until I finish my degree." That just until turned into 3 years. I moved into a small apartment near them, picking Clara up from daycare when Sarah had late classes, keeping her overnight when Paul had business dinners. I sang Clara lullabies, kissed her scraped knees, and read her bedtime stories until her eyelids grew heavy. When Sarah finally graduated, Paul's career was taking off very quickly. They bought their first house in a very expensive neighborhood, and suddenly my daily help wasn't needed anymore. "We've hired a nanny," Sarah informed me over lunch one day. "She has excellent references and a degree in early childhood education." "Oh," I had said, trying hard to hide my disappointment. "That's wonderful. You've done so much, Mom," she added, patting my hand. "It's time you had your life back." But Clara had become my whole life. Being away from her felt like losing a part of myself. Still, I stepped back. I went back to teaching full-time and saw Clara only during planned weekend visits. I watched from a distance as Sarah and Paul moved up the social ladder, moving into bigger houses, joining exclusive clubs, and attending fancy events. I was still invited for holidays and birthdays, but I always felt a little out of place among their new friends with their perfect clothes and polished conversations about fancy vacations and places I would never see. I brought homemade gifts because they felt more meaningful, even as I noticed them being quietly put aside in favor of the expensive, store-bought presents from others. Then came the Christmas when Clara was 7. I had spent months knitting her a soft blanket with characters from her favorite storybook. When she opened it, her eyes lit up. "Look, Mommy, it's Princess Lily and the Enchanted Forest. Grandma made it." Sarah had given a tight smile. "That's nice, dear. Why don't you open the gift from Daddy and me now?" It was a huge, elaborate dollhouse, almost as tall as Clara herself, with tiny electric lights and little furniture. That probably cost more than my entire monthly salary. My handmade blanket was forgotten within minutes. That night, after Clara went to bed, Sarah pulled me aside. "Mom, about the gifts," she began, sounding a bit unsure. "Paul and I were thinking, perhaps next year you could chip in for something we're already getting her, something from the list we send to everyone. You want me to contribute to your presents instead of bringing my own?" I asked, confused. "It's just that, well, Clara's getting to an age where she notices these things. The other children at her school, their grandparents give them store-bought things, expensive things." I finished for her, my voice flat. "I didn't mean it like that," she said. But her eyes told a different story as I sat alone after. The wedding, all these painful memories came rushing back. Each one was a piece of evidence I had chosen to ignore. Each one was a warning sign I had pretended not to see. For years, I had been slowly but surely pushed to the edges of my own family. Yet still, I kept showing up. When Clara had chickenpox and both Sarah and Paul were too busy with work, I took a week off just to care for her. When Sarah needed emergency surgery, I stayed at their house for 10 days, cooking, cleaning, and making sure Clara's daily life wasn't disturbed. When Paul's mother broke her hip and couldn't host their yearly Thanksgiving dinner, I opened my humble home to their entire family. Spending 2 weeks preparing a meal that Sarah later described as charming and rustic. I gave and gave, until giving became my whole identity, until sacrifice felt as natural as breathing. And what did it get me? A seat at table 32, instructions to the photographer to keep me out of the main wedding album, and the crushing knowledge that my own daughter saw me as an embarrassment. The old grandfather clock chimed. Midnight as I carefully placed the photos back on the shelf. The house felt too quiet, too empty, too full of ghosts from a past I could not get back. I went to my desk and pulled out a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "The next chapter," because that's what this would be. Not an end. I refused to let them write me off so easily. This was a beginning. For decades, I had lived only for others. Now, it was time to live for myself. My phone began to ring, Sarah's name flashing on the screen. She was probably calling to make sure I had arrived home safely, or perhaps to check that I hadn't caused a scene by leaving early. For the first time in my life, I let her call go straight to voicemail. That small act of defiance felt like taking my first true deep breath in many years. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to 6 missed calls from Sarah and a text message that read, "Mom, where did you go? T's parents noticed you. We're missing during the cake cutting. Call me." There was no, "Are you okay?" No, "I hope you got home safely." Just concern about how it looked, about what Paul's important parents might think. I put the phone aside without replying, and made myself a strong cup of coffee that as I sat at my kitchen table. Watching the early morning light filter through the curtains Arthur had hung so many years ago, I started to see patterns in Sarah's behavior that I had stubbornly ignored for years. The wedding seating arrangement was not a single, isolated event. It was simply the most obvious in a long line of subtle ways I had been excluded. 3 months earlier, Sarah had hosted a special brunch before the wedding for Clara's bridesmaids and close family members. I only found out about it when Clara happened to mention it during one of our phone calls. "Oh, Grandma, the brunch at Mom's was amazing. She even had that special caterer from the city make those little egg soufflés you love." I had stumbled through a reply, pretending I had been invited but just couldn't make it, not wanting to put Clara in an awkward spot. Later, when I asked Sarah about it, she was very dismissive. It was very last minute. "Mom, and you know how you hate driving in the city? I didn't think you'd want to come all that way just for brunch." Then there was Clara's college graduation 2 years before. I had arranged to take time off work months in advance, only to discover just a week before that Sarah had booked only 4 seats at a special graduation dinner at a very fancy restaurant. It's Paul's parents, us, and Clara. She had explained. The restaurant couldn't fit any more people on such short notice, but we can meet for coffee before the ceremony. Coffee before the ceremony. As if I were a distant acquaintance. Not the woman who had helped raise Clara during her most important early years, and last Christmas had been invited as usual. But upon arriving, I found out that the family portrait session Sarah had planned, with a professional photographer, was already finished. "Oh, we did that earlier," Sarah had said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Paul had a conference call later, and you know how he gets when he's rushed." The doorbell rang, pulling me sharply out of my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah standing on my porch, her face a mix of annoyance and worry. I hesitated, my hand resting on the doorknob. This difficult talk was going to happen anyway. I needed to create new rules for our relationship. That couldn't happen if I just avoided her completely. I opened the door but did not step aside to let her in, as I normally would have. "Mom," she said, her voice tight. "Why aren't you answering your phone? I've been calling all morning." "I've been busy," I replied simply. She looked surprised by my tone. "Busy doing what? You left the wedding without saying goodbye to anyone? Paul's mother was asking about you." "Was she really?" I asked, unable to hide the doubt in my voice. "Or was she just making sure I hadn't done anything to embarrass you?" Sarah's eyes grew wide. "What is that supposed to mean?" "I think you know exactly what it means, Sarah." I kept my voice calm, even though my heart was beating fast. "I overheard you and your friend talking in the office yesterday about how you placed me at table 32 to keep me out of the way, about the photographer's instructions to keep me out of the main album." The color drained from her face. "You were listening." "I was walking back from the bathroom and simply happened to hear my name." "Should I have announced my presence? So you could pretend you hadn't just called me an embarrassment?" "What do you want from me, Mom?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. It was a question I had never truly thought about before. What did I want from my daughter? "I want to be treated with basic respect and consideration," I said finally. "I want to be valued for who I am, not hidden away because I don't fit your new image. But more than that, I want to stop putting my own life on hold for someone who clearly doesn't appreciate it." Sarah looked shocked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying things are going to change, Sarah. I won't be at your beck and call anymore. I won't rearrange my life to fit yours. And I certainly won't show up just to be humiliated at family events." She stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In some ways, maybe she was. The mother she knew would have given in by now, would have accepted her weak apology and gone back to the old pattern of giving too much and getting too little in return. But that woman was gone, left behind at table 32, along with the pearl necklace and the generous check. "I need to go," Sarah said finally, her voice shaky. "Clara and David are having a post-wedding brunch. Everyone will be wondering where I am." "Course," I said. "Appearances are important." She flinched, then turned to leave. At the bottom of the porch steps, she paused and looked back. "Will you at least call Clara? She was upset that you left without saying goodbye." "I'll call her tomorrow," I promised. Today, I have plans of my own. For the first time since Arthur died, I felt truly in charge of my own life. The path ahead was unknown, perhaps even lonely at times, but it was my path to choose. No longer would I be a small detail in someone else's story. It was time to write my own. After Sarah left, I went back to my notebook and the lists I had been making. What had started as a way to release my feelings was becoming something more real. A clear plan for my new life. A life where I would no longer simply orbit around Sarah's family like a forgotten satellite. I opened my computer and checked my savings account. The amount wasn't huge, but it was enough to begin. I had been saving for years to help Clara with her wedding, but that money had gone untouched. Now it would serve a different purpose. My own happiness. First, I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the local community college. Art had been my passion in college before I met Arthur, before life's duties pushed my creative dreams to the side. The class started next Tuesday evening. The very same evening I usually looked after Clara's cat when she and Sarah had their monthly spa appointments. They would simply have to find other arrangements. Next, I booked a trip to the vast Grand Canyon for the following month. It wasn't Italy, the dream trip that would take more careful planning, but it was a beginning. Arthur and I had always talked about seeing it together. Hey now, I would go alone, carrying his memory with me in a way that felt right for me. My phone vibrated again. Another text from Sarah. I read it slowly, not wanting to. Mom, we need to talk about this. Paul thinks you're overreacting. Can you please call me? Paul thinks. Of course he does. I didn't even bother to reply. Instead, I went to my closet and began sorting through my clothes. Most of my clothes were practical, plain pieces, chosen for comfort and how long they would last, not for style. Clothes that wouldn't stand out or draw attention at Everett family gatherings. Clothes chosen to simply blend into the background. I pulled out anything I hadn't worn in a year and put it in a pile for donation. By the time I finished, my closet was half empty, but what was left were clothes I actually liked. Tomorrow, I would go shopping for the first time in years without even thinking if my choices would be approved by Sarah. The doorbell rang again in the late afternoon. This time, it was Clara. Her eyes were red and tired, her hair pulled back quickly in a messy ponytail, a sharp difference from the glowing bride of yesterday. Unlike with Sarah, I immediately stepped aside to let her in. Grandma, she said, her voice breaking. Why did you leave? I was looking everywhere for you after the cake cutting. The hurt in her eyes was real, and for a moment, my strong resolve weakened. Of everyone in the Everett family, Clara was the only one who had ever truly made me feel wanted. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said gently. I wasn't feeling well, and it seemed better to quietly slip out instead of causing a scene. It wasn't the complete truth. But I couldn't bring myself to burden her with my sadness. Not when she was still so happy from her wedding. Day Mom said you had a fight this morning, she insisted, following me into the kitchen. She was crying when she came to the brunch. I kept myself busy making tea, giving myself time to think of a reply that wouldn't put Clara in the middle of our problems. Your mother and I have some things we need to work through, I said carefully. But that's just between us. It has nothing to do with you or how much I love you. Clara sat at the kitchen table, looking around at the stacks of papers and the open notebook where I had been planning my new life. Her eyes rested on the brochure for the Grand Canyon tour. You're going on a trip? She asked, surprise clear in her voice. Yes, I replied, putting a mug of tea in front of her. Something I've always wanted to do. By yourself? Yes, by myself. She looked troubled by this, though I couldn't quite understand why. But you've never traveled alone before. There are a lot of things I've never done before, I said, smiling to soften my words. It's about time I started, don't you think? I guess, she said, still frowning slightly. Just, I don't know, different? We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our tea. I could see the questions forming in her eyes. It's confusion as she tried to understand the grandmother she knew always there, always ready to help with the woman sitting across from her now, booking solo trips and signing up for art. Class's grandma, she finally asked, Are you okay? Really okay? The genuine worry in her voice touched me deeply. Despite everything, despite being raised in a world of wealth and status, Clara had somehow kept a truly kind heart. I'm getting there, I answered. Honestly, for a long time, I haven't been living my own life. I've been living in the shadows of yours and your mother's lives. It's time I changed that. 'Cause of what happened at the wedding, she pressed. I took her hand across the table. The wedding was just the final piece of a puzzle I've been trying not to see for years. This isn't about punishing anyone, Clara. It's about me finally taking care of myself. The way I've always taken care of everyone else. She nodded slowly, though I could tell she didn't fully understand. How could she, at 26, newly married with the world open before her? She couldn't possibly understand the quiet desperation of a woman who had given up her own identity so completely for others that she almost lost herself entirely. "Will you still come to Sunday dinners?" she asked in a small voice. "David and I want to start hosting them at our new house once we're back from the honeymoon." "Course I will," I promised her, squeezing her hand. "Nothing will change between us, I promise." As I walked her to the door later, she hugged me tightly. "I love you, Grandma, more than you know." "I love you too, sweetheart, always." After she left, I returned to my planning with even stronger determination. Seeing Clara had reminded me of what was still truly valuable in my life, the real connections, free from any sense of duty or expectation to perform. My phone rang again. Sarah, as persistent as ever. This time I answered. "Mom, finally," she began, her voice tense. "We need to talk about this." "Not today," I said firmly. "I need some time. But goodbye, Sarah." I hung up and turned. The ringer off tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own difficult talks. But tonight belonged to me, to my own dreams, my own plans, my own future. The old Beatrice would have spent the evening worrying about Sarah's feelings, making excuses for her behavior, trying to smooth things over. The new Beatrice poured herself a glass of wine, opened a book she had been wanting to read for months, and allowed herself, perhaps for the first time in decades, to put her own happiness first. It wasn't a huge, dramatic act of defiance. There were no slammed doors, no angry ultimatums, just a quiet, firm decision to take back my life, one small choice at a time. And somehow, that felt more powerful than any grand announcement could have been. 1 month after the wedding, I stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon, watching the sunset paint the ancient rock formations in stunning shades of gold and deep red. The vastness of it all made me feel small, reminding me how tiny our human worries truly are against the endless stretch of time. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a woman who had set up her camera tripod near mine. She was about my age, with short silver hair and soft lines around her eyes from smiling. "More beautiful than I could have ever imagined," I replied. "First time here?" she asked. "First time anywhere in a long while," I admitted. Name was Diane, a retired literature professor from another state who was traveling across the country by herself, taking photos of national parks. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet for dinner that evening. It was the start of my first new friendship in many decades, over plates of spicy Southwestern food. Diane shared stories of her travels, her career, and her late husband. Unlike the forced conversations at Everett family gatherings, where I always felt like I was being judged without a word, this conversation was easy, natural, and truly refreshing. "So, what finally got you out here?" Diane asked. "You said it's been a while since you've traveled." I found myself telling her about the wedding, about Table 32, about my decision to finally take back my life. There was something freeing about sharing my story with someone who had no old ideas about me, no personal interest in how my story turned out. "Good for you," she said when I finished, raising her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," I repeated, feeling a real smile spread across my face. My watercolor class had been just as life-changing. After decades away from art, my first attempts were clumsy and unsure. But there was real joy in the process, in watching colors mix and flow on the paper, in creating something just for my own pleasure, without worrying about anyone else's opinion. The teacher, a gentle man named Mark with gray dreadlocks and paint-stained jeans, encouraged trying new things and having fun more than being perfect. "The goal isn't to create masterpieces," he told the class. "It's to find again the part of yourself that creates just for the pure joy of it." I had almost forgotten that such joy even existed. Years of judging my own worth based on how useful I was to others had dimmed that inner light to almost nothing. But now, stroke by stroke, color by color, it was slowly coming back to life. When I returned from the Grand Canyon, found 3 voicemails from Sarah. The first 2 were angry demands that I call her back. The third left after a week of my silence was much quieter. "Mom, please call me. I don't understand what's happening. Clara says you're traveling, taking art classes. We need to talk about this." I did call her back, but on my own terms when I was ready. We met at a neutral place, a coffee shop halfway between our homes. Sarah arrived looking stressed and defensive. "I've been trying to reach you for weeks," she said, blaming me as soon as she sat down. "I needed some time," I replied. Calmly, "I've been busy." "Busy," she repeated, as if the idea of me having a life that didn't revolve around her needs was impossible to grasp. "Mom, what's happening with you? First you disappear from the wedding, then you won't talk to me. And now Clara tells me you're traveling alone and learning to paint." "Yes," I said simply, "I am. But why? Is this some kind of I don't know a crisis? Are you punishing me for the seating arrangement? Because if that's what this is about, it's not a crisis, Sarah." I interrupted gently. "And it's not about punishment. It's about me finally putting myself first after decades of me putting everyone else first." She stared at me, truly confused. "I don't understand." "What does that even mean?" "It means that I'm no longer available whenever you call. I have my own life now, my own interests, my own plans. I'll still be part of your lives, but we'll be on more equal terms." "Equal terms," she echoed, her voice getting a little louder. "Mom, we're family. There are no terms with family." "That's exactly the problem," I said. "Family should mean respecting each other and thinking about each other's feelings. For years, I've shown up whenever you called, changed my plans to fit yours, and accepted being treated like an afterthought. That is changing now." Sarah's expression hardened. "So you are punishing me." "No, I'm respecting myself." "There's a difference." We talked in circles for almost an hour. Sarah went back and forth between defending herself, trying to make me feel guilty, and sometimes truly not understanding. I stayed calm, but held strong to my new boundaries. "I have a yoga class at 6, I finally said, gathering my things. "I need to go." "Yoga?" Sarah looked as if I had said I was flying to Mars. "Since when do you do yoga?" 2 weeks ago, I replied with a small smile. "I'm enjoying it." As I stood to leave, Sarah reached out and took my hand. "Mom, please, I don't want to lose you." The sadness and fear in her voice touched me. Despite everything, she was still my daughter, the little girl I had raised alone, the very center of my world for so many years. "You're not losing me, Sarah," I said softly. "You're just meeting the real me for the first time in a very long time. The me who has her own needs and dreams. The me who deserves to be seen and valued, not hidden away at table 32. I saw something flicker in her eyes. Perhaps recognition, or the very beginning of understanding. But we both knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight. Years of old habits couldn't be changed in just one conversation. Sunday dinner. "At Clara's next week," she said as I turned to go. "Will you be there?" "I will," I promised. "But I'll be bringing a dessert I want to make. Not the one Paul's mother prefers, and I'll be leaving by 8 for a photography class I signed up for." Sarah nodded slowly, still trying to understand this new reality where her mother had her own limits and expectations. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. The path ahead was still uncertain, and my relationship with my daughter was still delicate and changing. But for the first time, I was walking with my head held high. I was no longer willing to make myself smaller to fit into the small space others had given me. I was rediscovering not just old passions, but a new sense of self-worth that had nothing to do with how useful I was to other people. Each class I took, each trip I planned, each new friend I made was another piece of myself that I was taking back from the shadows. The woman who had sat alone at table 32 was slowly disappearing, making room for someone stronger, more real, and finally, truly alive. 2 years passed more quickly than I could have imagined. My life, which used to be only about waiting for Sarah's calls and Clara's occasional visits, was now full of activity and purpose. I finally traveled to Italy, seeing the famous canals of Venice and the incredible art of Florence, places I had dreamed about for decades. My watercolor painting skills had improved so much that 3 of my paintings were displayed in a local art gallery's community show. On a crisp autumn Sunday, I was getting ready for one of my regular dinners with my new photography group when my doorbell rang. Sarah stood on my porch, alone and without the perfect, polished look she usually kept. Her eyes were red and swollen, her shoulders slumped. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "I need your help." 2 years ago, I would have immediately dropped everything to fix whatever problem she was facing. But the woman I had become paused, taking a slow breath before answering. "Come in," I said. "I have about an hour before I need to leave for dinner with friends." She nodded, accepting this boundary in a way the old Sarah never would have. As we sat in my living room, which I had recently redecorated with items from my travels and paintings from my art classes, she told me about her problems. Toll had lost a very important client at his law firm. Their money situation, while not terrible, was strained enough that they might need to cut back on their very expensive lifestyle. The country club membership, Clara's car payments, the vacation house. "We can't keep up with everything," she admitted. "And you're here because," I asked gently, prompting her. "Because I don't know how to handle this," she said honestly. "You always managed. Even when money was tight, you never fell apart." I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. "I can't solve this for you, Sarah," I said carefully, "but I can listen. I can support you while you figure it out yourself." "That's all I'm asking for," she replied, which surprised me. "Just be my mom, the way you always were before I started pushing you away." It wasn't a perfect coming together. There were still uncomfortable moments, still times when old bad habits almost returned, but it was a true beginning. Later that month, Claire invited me to lunch, just the 2 of us. Over salads and iced tea, she reached for my hand. "Grandma, I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have stood up for you at the wedding. I knew what Mom was doing, and I said nothing. You were the bride, sweetheart. It wasn't your job to fix things. Still, I want you to know that I see you, the real you, and I admire you so much for what you've done these past 2 years." As I drove home that afternoon, I realized that the pain from table 32 had finally started to heal. Not because I had been welcomed back into their world on their terms, but because I had created a life where their approval was no longer necessary for my happiness. I was Beatrice Everett. Artist, traveler, friend, teacher, mother, grandmother. Every one of these roles was important, but no single one defined me completely. Table 32 had been meant as an insult, a way to hide me away. Instead, it had become the powerful force for my freedom, and for that, I was unexpectedly, profoundly grateful. Life lesson. This story teaches us the profound importance of self-worth and setting boundaries. Even with family, true respect is earned through valuing oneself and recognizing that a life lived for others without self-care can lead to quiet suffering. Ultimately, finding personal liberation can lead to unexpected reconciliation. Not on terms of obligation, but on terms of genuine respect and love.